Bueno, para este Fogón Fichinero tuvimos la posibilidad, gracias a la gente de Xbox Argentina, de charlar con Carrie Patel, Game Director de Avowed, para Obsidian Entertainment. Así que los dejamos con la entrevista y esperamos que les guste. Thank you, Carrie, for being here with me today. It's certainly a pleasure. And well, for start, I wasn't sure if I was going to speak just with you or also with Gabe, so I have a mixture of questions prepared for both, but maybe you can help me uh, with both of them. So, and just to start, can you let our audience and readers know what is and what was your role or your main role as game director in About?
Sure. So my name's Carrie Patel. As you mentioned, I'm the game director of Avowed, so I'm responsible for the creative vision and direction of the project as a whole.
Okay, and it was going to be something for both of you to share the experience. But can you tell us a little bit how it was that, or how do they integrate both roles, the gameplay director and your role as game director in the development of the game, of course.
Sure. So, as the game director, I oversee the various creative departments that go in that are all part of making the full experience. As gameplay director, Gabe is head of one of those departments. Gameplay is responsible for systems, combat, character progression, enemy encounters, itemization, all the more mechanical things outside of, separate, for instance, from art and quests and dialogue and those things. Although, as you know well, in an RPG, those things tend to blend together a lot. So we have to maintain, close collaboration, strong communication to make sure that we're all working towards the same player experience.
And which one would you say it was the most difficult one to implement?
Yeah, it's difficult to say because every part of the experience comes with its own challenges. Um, I think on the gameplay side, one thing that's a challenge that the team has tackled really, really well is kind of translating the combat experience into kind of first person action, even with a heavy focus on melee. As you probably saw in Developer Direct, the player has plenty of non-melee options, from pistols to wands to spells, etc. But it's very easy for I think first person melee combat to just feel like a lot of repetitive whacking. And Gabe and his team have done an excellent job of creating a really strong sense of movement and dynamism, a really great feel to the different weapons players can hold and wield. Like if you're swinging a big two-hander, that's going to feel like it has some weight and heft, and it's going to feel very different from like a really sharp, quick dagger that you're using against an enemy.
It's great that you say that because it was actually going to be something from further down the line,
Hmm.
and it was going to be, of course, for Gabe if he was here. But from a gameplay perspective, and you said it, how it has to translate into that first-person view and into the game world itself. But do you say that about it's going to be challenging towards the player in terms of combining different strategies? For example, I feel super comfortable with that giant hammer that you said just now, but maybe there are players that might be more comfortable with dual wielding ones.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a game that might push the player to experience with different systems, or that if I prefer to go with my big heavy hammer, it's going to be okay for all the campaign.
Yeah. So players will definitely one thing to know about the game is in terms of mechanics, it's a classless progression system. And the player can very easily swap and try out different weapons. So we wanted to make sure that it was very easy for players to experiment and find their preferred play style. That it was easy for them to try new things. Maybe you're wielding a big two-handed hammer that you found, but then you find maybe a unique one-handed mace, and it's got some unique enchantments on it, and it's higher tier than what you have. And so you say, well, I haven't been using it, but maybe this will be better for now. And you can absolutely pick that up and use it. So we wanted to make it easy for players to experiment, to find their play style, and also make sure that whatever kind of character they wanted to build would be viable and successful. So if your player prefers dual wielding wands or anything really, you might not have access to block if you don't have a shield in your offhand. So hopefully you're investing in dodge so that you can move around and avoid enemies that way. Or maybe you have Kai in your party, and his, skill set is a bit more tanky. So maybe you send him to draw more aggro so that you can stay at a distance, avoid taking too much damage, and fight from there. So to answer your question, like, yes, players can find success with a variety of play styles and loadouts and ability combinations. We do try, and again, one of the things Gabe's team is building is enough variety in the encounters that players are encouraged to try different things, and they won't find the exact same sequence of move. You're going to find some encounters that have, again, heavier enemies that are going to hit really hard, and so you might think, well, I either need to keep some distance, or make sure that the gear I'm wearing is going to protect me well. So it's not to say that there's that we're, I guess, basically, like, yes, you can find your play style, but you're going to have to adapt a little bit in the moment to moment as well.
Yeah, it's kind of something in
Yeah.
between.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. And how many, I don't know if you can share this with us, but how many weapons and spell can we find throughout the game?
Goodness. I don't have a count off the top of my head. But I mean, you know, we've got a really strong variety of, again, kind of the melee and magical weapons. You've got a lot of your classics like sword, mace, axe. You've got some one-handed options, some two-handed options. You've got wands, you've got pistols, you've got an arquebus, which is an even larger firearm. So you have several different types that will, again, suit different play styles and different, player fantasies. And then within those, you're going to have various uniques that you can find throughout the game.
Okay, thank you so much. And maybe this is going to mix a little bit with the more narrative part, right? But is there any particular way in which a selection of tools might force the player to opt for one approach or another? Let's like say in a classic RPG, I have to convince an NPC
Hmm.
to let me go through, or and maybe my charisma stats are not higher enough, so I have to look for another approach. And players are going to be finding this kind of deep level in About, or is it going to be something more lighthearted for everyone to approach?
So, I mean, players will, we don't want players to ever feel like locked out of content, like, oh, you can't do this quest because you didn't have, this particular background or stat or what have you. But players will find that their options when they're going through a quest will change based on, the background that they've chosen for their character, or based on maybe interactions that they've had with other characters previously in the game. There's some characters you'll meet early on who have reputations and relationships with other people in the world, and when you encounter their friends and foes later, they'll remember how you treated these people earlier, and that might affect what options you have available to you. So there's a delicate balance there where yes, you absolutely want to create options and opportunities for players to use, the specific character that they've been progressing, and take advantage of the reactivity and the consequences that they've created for themselves, but not in a way that feels like it's ever excluding players from being able to finish content.
Okay, it is also great that you bring the reactivity to the table because I know that it's one of the big things that is coming to about. So on the direct last, I think it was last week or the previous one. Yeah, kind of.
Time is a construct. Yeah.
So there was an example between we were going to believe, and we wanted to know if, even if we might understood a little bit how it's going to be on the game. We want to know how deep it's going to be. How much are going to those NPCs remember what we did or did not, and if you could give us another little example.
Yeah, so I don't want to spoil anything, but it's the thing with reactivity is, you want it to feel there's a balance of earned and surprising and organic but obvious. And so, if you maybe, screw over one character in one quest, or, result in it, give them an outcome that maybe they're not happy with. um it's not as if every single time that person's gonna hunt you down and, have an encounter. If you do the same thing all the time, it becomes very predictable, and it's also like, do these people have nothing else that they're doing in this world? Everyone has so much time to come looking for me. I think what feels really good is when players are, you know seeing the consequences of their actions, and some of those consequences are very big, and some of them are very intimate and personal. And some of them the player can stumble across pretty soon after the quest that they've just completed, and some of them you may not see for several hours. And some of them are going to be the accumulated result of, decisions that you've made over the course of the game. um, there's a particular moment with one character where you might want something from them, or want to reach an agreement with them, and their willingness to do that is going to be based on several decisions that you've made up to that point, and that's going to inform whether they feel they can trust you. So again, I think it's all about having a variety in terms of the scope and the type and the timeline of those impacts, so that these things feel, again, natural and organic and surprising but believable. But all in all, it adds to players feeling like their experience in the game is a very personal one.
For what you're saying, and it was something that I was going to ask at the beginning with the other order of questions. Um, Obsidian came from a last year that was awesome. The last game that was released was Pentiment. I really loved it. It was an awesome experience. And as you were saying it, I could relate to the way Pentiment is displayed. There's consequences to the acts that might not appear as soon as you make the decision, but years after
Hmm.
in that case. So we are talking about pretty much that level.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different games, so it's hard to compare. But yeah, that I think Pentiment is a great example of exactly what you're saying, where, some of the payoffs are very quick and some take place much later, and it just keeps the world feeling very alive and very reactive.
Okay, I cannot wait to ruin someone's life because I know that it's going to happen. It happened to me in Pentiment. It was like that was not my intention at all. So yeah, it's going to happen. Minute. Since about take place, and correct me please if I'm wrong, but it takes place in the world of Eora from Pillars of Eternity. In which context is it going to be, or is it going to fall as something completely separated?
So the events of Avowed are not directly connected to the events of Pillars of Eternity or Deadfire. So that means that players who have never experienced either of those games can come to Avowed fresh and have a good time. There are a couple of concepts and even a few characters that players who have played Pillars and Deadfire might recognize, who make an appearance in Avowed. So, there are very much some Easter eggs and nuggets that returning fans will recognize, but you don't have to have played those games. You don't have to read the Wikipedias. You can come to it fresh, only knowing about Avowed, and have a good and complete experience.
So it's not something that is going to be like a shared universe where a big story is developing. Maybe some.
I mean, it does take so Avowed does take place in the same world as Pillars of Eternity, as you mentioned. It's Aora, and it's, the timeline wise, it's not too far off from the events of Deadfire,
Okay.
but they're almost opposite corners of the world. Deadfire is this archipelago, I think, kind of in the south, and then the Living Lands is this island in the distant north. So what's happening in both of those places is fairly separate.
Okay, and as being faraway places from one another, we can expect some flora and fauna completely different from what players from Pillars of it. Sorry, Pillars of Eternity, sorry, can expect, right?
So players will definitely see some creatures that they might recognize from the previous games. You've seen Zarps in Developer Direct. Those were definitely a very familiar enemy type in Pillars and Deadfire. So there are definitely some familiar enemies, but a few new ones as well.
Okay, that's great. And just, well, maybe, but this point you already answered this. But let's try to squeeze it a little bit. How much of Pillars of Eternity can the players expect to see transpired into About?
So the main thing that I think Pillars and Avowed share in common, besides the world, the lore, the same history, again, you'll have characters have some of the same reference points. If anyone's talking about animancy, they probably remember things like the Bow Reach incident and, kind of other famous disasters that have made that a very controversial subject in the world of Pillars of Eternity. So again, there are those common reference points. There is that shared history. But I think in terms of theme and tone and structure, a big thing that all of the Pillars games, including Avowed, share in common is this really unique blend of a very grounded political story and kind of a very thoughtful metaphysical and divine story, and then a role that puts the player character straddling both. So they have come in with a very unique role, very unique insights, and that gives them both a lot of awareness and a lot of influence over both of those directions. Again, if you look at Pillars 1, if you look at Deadfire, those are kind of very much structures that we built both of those games around. And then between that, you have a lot of content in the world, from your crit path quest to your side quests to your kind of smaller encounters and bits of found storytelling, that all build around that, with a very unique cast of characters and kind of some variety in terms of the tone and experience. Like it's not all serious. Like you've got moments that are very serious, and have big implications for the rest of the world, and then you've got moments of levity and surprise and things that are a little more lighthearted. But again, all of those working together to create a rich tapestry for players that creates a really unique experience.
Awesome. Well, just a couple more questions, and I don't know if you can answer this one, but do you know how long it's going to be approximately, the game?
So obviously, it depends a lot on your play
Yeah.
style. How completionist are you? What difficulty are you playing on? But players can expect something comparable to the Outer Worlds.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. And last question: what are you most eager to see the fans experiencing when About releases?
I'm really eager to see people encounter some of our stickier choice moments. And there are a couple of pretty big surprises that we've nested in the game that, if players discover them, can have a pretty big impact on the state of the world. But they're really just there to be found. So I love to see players dig into those things. I love kind of seeing players discover them for themselves, and then wonder how much more like that is hidden throughout the world.
Okay. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for your time. I know that it's going to be awesome. It looks really nice, and we certainly cannot wait to play it. So thank you so much for the time here with us today.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.